The Aquest Podcast, Funds Industry Conversations.
Hello, podcast listeners, and welcome to the Aquest Podcast. After a brief flirtation on other podcast channels, we're back with a new season of the Aquest Podcast. If you like it, do hit the like button and make sure to subscribe on whatever is your usual podcast providing channel. For this episode of the Aquest Podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Glynn of Code in Motion. Sam is a cybersecurity expert, and I thought we're better to start than in early June 2021 by chatting to a cyber expert, given what we've just seen happen in terms of the cyber attack at the Health Service Executive in Ireland. So we chat a bit about that, but mostly about the types of issues that can go wrong when firms hit cyber issues, what firms that are doing well on the cyber front are doing, and some hints and tips that Sam has for us around outsourcing, around dealing with HQ, around directors and non-techie people talking to techies. And he even has some insights for us on firms that are in the RegTech or FinTech space looking to sell into regulated firms. So we cover loads of ground during the course of the podcast. So all you got to do is sit back, enjoy, and listen to Sam guide us through the world of cybersecurity in June 2021. Well, welcome, Sam. Welcome to the Aquest Podcast. Great to have you here as a guest.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. It's great to be here.
Tell me this. So we record early June 2021. We're going to talk about the HSE cybersecurity breach. I guess cyber is front and center now. It's very much in the spotlight. I wonder, do you feel like a rock star now as you deal with your clients? Are you held in higher esteem than ever? What are the vital services? They doff their cap to you and
I don't think that would ever be the case with someone who works in IT or information security. I do think for a lot of clients, it's just reinforced what they already know, that, cybersecurity or information security or, security around your data and your valuables is quite a risk for every firm. And when things go wrong, they can go drastically wrong. So, the HSE piece is quite an extreme example of that. And obviously nobody wants something like that to happen to any firm. But it does just kind of remind people that while risk is talked about in very kind of theoretical terms sometimes, the likes of cyber risk is a real risk.
It can come home to roost very, very quickly and in a very big way. So for our listeners who aren't familiar with the what happened with the HSE, which is the Irish Health Service Executive, what happened with the HSE, Sam?
Well, I suppose there's a bit of media speculation, and I'm not going to add to it, but I suppose at a certain point on a Friday, 4 a.m., it was discovered that there was something untoward going on within the health service IT systems, and kind of in parallel, it had also been identified in a government department, the Department of Health, and that attack in the Department of Health was stopped, but unfortunately it wasn't stopped in time in the HSE. So officially the HSE have called it a very sophisticated and complex attack. It sounds like it was there for a number of weeks or months before it was detected. And the upshot is basically the HSE shut down all of their IT systems to protect against any further damage. And the criminals involved, the Wizard Spider, I think is the name of the gang that's been identified, and the Conti ransomware is a type of ransomware that attacked. What they have done is they have run ransomware, which usually would encrypt the files on systems and make systems unusable. And the only way to get that data back is either to get a password from the criminals, for which you pay a handsome fee, or if you've got reliable backups that haven't been attacked and destroyed by the gang, then potentially you could use the backups to get your systems back. The double extortion piece on this one, which is quite common these days with ransomware, is not only do they lock the data away from you, they're aware that one of your most effective defenses to that is having a backup. So they get around that defense by also taking a copy of the data. So even if you can restore your data from your backup, it doesn't stop or deal with the fact that they now have a copy of the data, and they threaten to release that on the dark web or to the public unless you pay a ransom. And then there's a triple extortion, which is in the event of the data being quite sensitive, which it obviously would be in a health scenario, They would also threaten to start extorting or trying to get ransom payments from the patients themselves. So there was a case in Finland, I think recently, where there was a cloud-based system that was being used to store the therapist's notes from those who might have been seeking mental health treatment. A lot of the notes from those sessions where patients would have been talking to the therapists in confidence, those notes were hacked and copied by a criminal gang. And they didn't necessarily go after the firm that ran the server. They actually went after the patients. So they started contacting the patients to say, look, we've hacked this system. We can see that you had therapy sessions over this period of time. We can see you talk about X, Y, and Z. If you don't pay us a ransom, we're going to make that public. And obviously that is a very distressing thing for somebody who's needed that help to hear. And then they've gone further and actually try to extort a payment from those who are mentioned in the therapy notes. So one example of that was a patient had mentioned problems with their parents when they were a kid. Their mother was named in the notes, and the gang contacted the mother, who obviously wasn't aware that she was mentioned in these notes, and started seeking ransom payments in return for this information. So there's the ransomware traditionally has been about stopping you getting at your data. The standard defense these days has been you have a backup, so you just restore that backup and you start again. The gang has moved on now. The attacks have moved on to also take a copy of the data. So just having a backup doesn't deal with that issue.
Well, if ever there was anything to make you shift uneasily in your seat as you listen to that, that kind of brings it home. But let's just go back to the start of that, Sam. What kind of method would have been used to get the ransomware into the system? Is it, James Bond criminals in a volcano lair working all the hours with sophisticated supercomputers?
Again, I won't talk specifically about the HC attack because it hasn't been publicly, acknowledged how it happened. But if you look at statistics, the majority of attacks on most firms, most of the time, get in through, a staff member being fooled by an email. So a phishing email, or a very targeted spear phishing email is sent into a staff member, which fools them into clicking a link or, to visit a certain website or download a file. And there's a series of events that might kick off that might eventually result in malware, malicious software being downloaded to their PC. And once that's in, then that's basically opened the door for the criminals to kind of spread their infection.
And that malware can sit there for a period of time before you detect that it exists. Sit there in the background, monitor what's going on, gather information, and I guess then make maximum impact when it is uncovered.
Yeah, I mean, it does depend on the nature of the attack, and some attacks are quite quick in terms of once the software lands, the malicious software lands onto the PC, it starts encrypting data quickly, and that can happen quite a speed. And if that happens, or when that happens, it will encrypt the data on the laptop, obviously, but it will also start encrypting any data that the laptop can get at. So things like the file shares that you may have access to because of your user account, it will start encrypting things that are on your network. Or again, it may also find other vulnerabilities on your laptop or on the network that enables it to spread to other machines and into servers. And it's why these things are called viruses. They just spread. Other more sophisticated ones would be where the criminals kind of go, okay, well, we're in now, but we don't know where we are. Or they may not know the type of firm that they're in. So they may sit there just to, gather intelligence about, well, where are we? Who is this person and what is this firm? What's valuable to this firm? What kind of turnover do they have each year? And therefore, what kind of ransom payment could they bear? And depending on the complexity and sophistication of the attack and the gang, and the level of defenses that the now infected victim has, they may be able to sit there and dwell there for quite a length of time, gathering information, enabling them to kind of then design just exactly what kind of attack will they launch, and that attack will be designed to knock out other defenses that the firm may have, primarily finding the backups that they have and either destroying the backups or trying to make sure that they're there long enough so the backups get infected as well. So basically, they're constantly looking at ways to say, well, if and when we launch an attack and we demand a ransom, what can we do to make sure that this victim has no other alternative but to pay the ransom?
And I guess one of the challenges that firms have and that you have then as a cybersecurity expert working with firms is that the cyber criminals are sophisticated, they're clever, they're innovative, they don't stand still. So when I guess when you think about the emails that come in that might trick somebody into downloading and opening a file, it's no longer the African prince with the fortune that you're going to be sharing in. It's, the types of emails look much more convincing. It's harder to determine and identify ones that are fraudulent and up to no good. And then, as you said, when it comes to when the attack has been deployed, the kind of plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D that the criminals have for extorting revenue from you get more and more sophisticated.
Yeah. I mean, depending on the data sample, because there is no one kind of, global source of reliable, complete data on this, but, the majority of attacks are not necessarily that sophisticated and they're not necessarily that targeted. It's nearly a kind of a spray and pray where the emails go out to whatever email addresses they can find. And then all they need is a low percentage of people to be fooled by that. But a lot of the attacks, they may be designed to look like notifications that there is a UPS delivery due to your house, because people are working at home now and they're getting a lot of things online, or, notifications from the revenue commissioners, or, emails that tell you there's suspicious activity on your account. And if you don't react urgently, then XYZ service will be cancelled or XYZ charge will be applied to your account. The nature of the emails changes because, they know, well, what is a legitimate email that somebody might expect to receive now? And they will just try to mimic what that legitimate email is, so that you're more likely to click on that mail. But the more targeted the mail, then obviously the higher the chance of a success, but the harder it is for them to do a lot of very well targeted emails. And that's why the security around your email system and around your partners' email systems is so important, because if somebody manages to get into your email account or an email account in your firm, yes, they will get at a lot of data in that mailbox, and that can present a hell of a lot of challenges around legal fees and investigation fees to see exactly what kind of data was in there. But as well as that, if they're in the email account, they are now you. They can now impersonate you. So now, you, in inverted commas, can start sending out emails to your colleagues or to your clients or to your suppliers, instructing them to do certain things or asking them for certain help. And because it has come from you, in inverted commas, they're more likely to help you. So firms need to be aware that, their email system could be a critical piece here. And also they need to be aware that even an email coming from a trusted source may not be trustworthy because that person's email account may have been compromised.
So when things go wrong, Sam, when you've worked with firms where they've had an issue, is this the thing that tends to be what goes wrong? As simple as an email and an email attachment?
Yes, it tends to be that way. I mean, there are other ways in. There are other doorways in. IT people have ways in. People have ways in to remotely access files. But email tends to be the doorway in because it's quite easy to fool people who haven't been made aware of the types of scams that go on. And once it comes in via email, if you've got into somebody's machine and that machine in turn has, vulnerabilities or certain things enabled that should be disabled, then you're now in and you can kind of spread the infection in other ways. So while coming in other doorways is another pathway in, email is, it's a true spray and pray. You can send a lot of emails to a lot of people in a short space of time. And
so when you've kind of worked with firms, or when you see firms that are in a good place, right? So they've got very good cybersecurity systems in place. What is it that they're doing that helps to protect them to a higher level?
I think there's a mix of tactical and strategic. So when you hear of another firm being a victim, it is always very useful to just go, right, well, whether I think I'm doing well or doing badly, let's just have a look at how this probably happened to that firm. How did those criminals get in? And when they got in, what did they do? And then just looking to say, well, could they do that here? What have we done to reduce the risk of that happening here? And someone working in risk will understand, well, risk is about reducing the likelihood of the thing happening, and then accepting that maybe, it could still happen. So reducing the impact of that thing happening. That's kind of tactical thing. So that's more reactive to say, well, this has happened to somebody we know, or this was a near miss. Let's learn from that. But I think strategically, it is very much about, taking a step back and saying, well, where is the valuable stuff? The data or the systems. What should we be protecting? How do we protect it at the minute? Where are the vulnerabilities, and how will the bad guys get in? And for each layer of security, you look at it and say, well, if they got past here, what's the next thing we have in place to try to defend against it? And the more layers you have, they call it defense in depth. So it's assuming that one defensive measure is not going to be enough. They'll get past that. But if you have defense in depth, layers of security, then you're making it harder every time for the malicious people to complete their activity. And that just takes an investment of time. There is no one piece of technology that you buy that will solve this problem. But if you just commit to saying, this is a true risk, it's not a theoretical risk, let's take a step back and focus on the crown jewels, the really valuable stuff that we have, whether it's personal data or confidential business internal stuff. Where is that data? Who has access to it? How do we restrict access to it? How do we defend against it? How do we notice if something is going on in there? How do we reduce the chance that it can be copied out? How do we make sure that the backups of that data are separate, completely away from our live network? There's lots of things, and therefore it can become very overwhelming. And when it comes to IT, because we speak a different language in IT for some reason, is when you're an expert in risk management, or you're an expert in your world and you're trying to deal with IT experts and they're speaking a different language, it can become a bit overwhelming, and you may choose to look somewhere else. But it is standard risk management. It's just saying, well, what are the risks? What are we doing? What are the controls we have in place to reduce the likelihood? What are the controls we can put in place to reduce the impact? What is the residual risk? Are we happy with that? If not, go back around again.
I want to come back to that in a moment about how to talk to IT professionals. But before we do, with work from home, obviously there was a massive shift to using devices in your own household and different networks potentially, and opened up new avenues of risk. Did firms, in your experience, react to that, and were they proactive in terms of identifying here are additional risks, let's manage, mitigate, monitor, eliminate? Were they a bit more lax than that? Did you see it result in any more?
It depends. I mean, some firms were very much kind of remote worker friendly or remote first workplaces. They would have adopted things like, never assume that when you're organizing a meeting, everyone's in the office, but then, when you're in a more traditional regulated environment, where they've been in existence 10, 20, 30 years, they were an office first world, where a lot of the assumptions around their security was that everything is physically in offices that we own or that we manage. Now, the migration to the cloud, which regulated firms may have been slower to do than the rest of the world or the rest of unregulated industries. But when you move to the cloud, suddenly your data is no longer in your physical premises. So the whole idea of physically protecting your physical premises doesn't deal with the risk of your data sitting out here in the cloud. And then with COVID and the enforced move to remote working, suddenly now even the people aren't in the same building. So if you've got this massive infrastructure that's, firewalls and various security components in an office, but there's no data in the office anymore, and there's no people in the office anymore, that, is a problem. And obviously firms would have had to play catch up with that. I think, firms at this point will have caught up with that. I would hope. we're over a year now since the crisis began. We are probably in a world where there's some kind of hybrid that will persist. So the idea that everyone will come back into the office again and that's the only place we have to worry about is probably no longer valid. And the idea that our data will be running on physical servers that are physically located in our offices, that's probably no longer valid either. So the COVID piece has just kind of pushed people into realizing, protecting based on physical location is not the way to protect. It's now we have to look at where's our data, and our data is unlikely to be on physical machines that we own. It's probably going to be over here on a Microsoft cloud server. It's probably going to be over here in some kind of SaaS provider. It's going to be all over the place. So it goes back into where is the data? What's the important data? How do we protect it?
Which brings me on then to outsourcing, and particularly outsourcing to cloud service providers. So I know, Sam, you work with firms that are in the financial services industry and regulated, and firms outside of it. But specifically in terms of Irish regulated financial services businesses, often they're part of an international group, and cyber tends to be managed out of HQ, or they may have like a center of excellence as some part of the business that's not necessarily the Irish business. So from the Irish business perspective, they're outsourcing to another group company. And from the regulator's perspective here, they view that as outsourcing the same as anything else. So they're very keen to make sure that the firm has the right governance and risk around outsourcing, that they understand what's involved, and that they're all over it. Have you kind of any insight or any advice for firms where they have outsourced cyber security, things to bear in mind as they try and manage that relationship?
Yeah, it is fun because in those scenarios, you're outsourcing to your parent. So what you might find is the parent is saying to you, the child, in its mind, you'll do what we do and stop asking. Whereas the Irish child is saying to the parent, no, actually, you're a supplier. You need to adopt the stance of a supplier. So we are the client, you are the supplier. So we need to make sure we need you to attest to these activities and that you have these security controls in place, or you're reviewing these things on whatever frequency. And we need you to provide us with evidence of that. And I think if you go into the global, CISO team or cyber team or IT security operations team or whatever, they're kind of going, well, hold on a second, you're asking me for that. You're only this menu over here in Ireland. You're asking me for stuff that my employer here in the US or my employer here in the UK isn't asking. And the difference there is, those teams are embedded within the UK firm or within the US firm. So the UK firm doesn't have to manage the cyber team as if it's a third-party supplier. So in a way, it's kind of like it's a bit like the EU. You're always better to be in the club rather than to be outside it, because once you're outside it, you have to start looking for evidence and all that. So I think that's the challenge for an Irish firm, is they're trying to get the parent to act like a supplier when the parent is just going, we're not a supplier, we own you. So stop being a headache. What I have found, though, is the way to possibly get around that is to try to find friends within the global organization. And that might be the CISO, the cyber people themselves, and say to them, well, look, guys, you're doing good things, but your parent, your employer may not know what you're doing, because how do you tell people that nothing has happened, that nothing bad has happened? Whereas if the Irish firm agrees with the cyber operations team or the second line team to start producing dashboards, start producing evidence of the good things they're doing, and that shows lots of green and maybe ambers that turn to green, then that is telling a story to the Irish firm, which the Irish firm needs, a very clear story to say, yes, we, the global team, are doing these things are green, we're in a good state, we're managing risks. But in turn, that enables them to kind of sell that approach to their global parent to say, well, we have to do this for our Irish entity over here. It is legally required. But just, would you be interested in seeing this kind of dashboard internally? Because it shows you not just, you can't, it won't just be you have to assume that we're doing the right things. This kind of dashboard will show you that we're doing the right things. What that enables a cybersecurity team to do is, if things start going amber, they might be going amber because there's not enough resources, or there's technology needed, or there's something else needed. And that will enable the cyber team to sell the business case, to say, this is amber, there's nothing we can really do about it unless you give us more people or more investment or whatever. And those who are looking at the dashboard may kind of go, okay, well, we like the dashboard being green. It gives us a lot of reassurance. We will support the business case to do whatever we need to do to send in the resources or the money to get that green.
So it sounds like the Irish business, rather than investing in cyber, needs to invest in stakeholder management training and find ways to ingratiate themselves to the HQ or the group.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like the cyber people or the IT people, it might feel undervalued by their employer in the UK or the US. By the Irish company coming in, Irish entity coming in and saying, well, we want to actually set up, a true client-supplier relationship. And if you were a supplier, you'd be selling the news, the good stories. You'd be selling the good stories of what you do. So let me help you sell what you do. And when you've done that, which is important to the Irish entity from a regulatory perspective, and also just for the Irish entity to know that this is really truly being managed effectively, it enables, the Irish firm could then turn around to the UK firm outside of cyber, into the global risk team or into the global operations team and say, look at what your guys are doing for us. Look at the good work they're doing. And then suddenly everyone thinks, well, actually cyber is valuable. They're selling a good story to the Irish entity. Why don't we let them sell their story to us?
Yeah, it's good. It's good advice, I guess, from a regulator perspective. Howsoever you tell the tale, when you use group that's considered as outsourcing and it's as covered by the outsourcing guidelines that are under consultation at the moment, and the cloud service provider guidance as well at European level. So it's important, and you really do have to be all over it. You can't assume everything is fine because it's been dealt with at HQ, and you can't sit back because HQ maybe doesn't want to engage as much with you or serve you as much with the information that you need.
Yeah, I mean,
you're going to stick your nose in.
Yeah, I think you will always hear the message from Global HQ to say, don't worry about it, we have this covered. I think the Irish entity isn't allowed, just go with that. And that isn't a good way to be anyway, just trusting this nameless team in some global location that they're doing the right thing. The guideline says, well, you can't just take their word for it. You have to get evidence. You need attestations, or you need some kind of an audit view that what they're doing is appropriate and complete. So I think that's the thing. It's the Irish entity needs evidence of the activity. And that's where you tend to find resistance, because they're not producing the evidence on a proactive basis for their own organization. And now you're telling them, we need you to produce the evidence for this little menu over here in Ireland. But what tends to happen after you get through that initial friction is they start realizing, actually, it is a good thing for us to be producing this evidence, because it's revealing gaps in what we thought was happening. Because we can't produce the evidence, it's revealing something that we didn't realize was being missed, But so it's a journey,
Yeah, whilst I'm picking your brain, Sam, have you got any advice or any tips on how to talk to IT people if you are, for example, you're on the risk side or the second line, or you're a director or an independent director, and you're receiving your report on something concerning cyber or tech? What are the tips to get through that conversation and actually understand what's been told to you?
How would I put it? I would say the phrase "dog with a bone." Be a dog with a bone. It kind of comes to mind. I mean, if I think of people in second line, let's say, somebody responsible for risk. So let's say the CRO is asking their IT operational people, this thing has happened here with the HSE. My understanding is, they got in this way. When they were in, they did this. They took a copy of the data. They're now demanding a ransom. It's 3 weeks later or whatever it is now from the HSE attack, and they're not even half their systems recovered. Now the HSE is a very complex organization. I'm not trying to underplay the task there. They're talking about, another number of weeks before everything is back. They're talking about it being €100 million in cost. So you talk about it in very clear business terms. There is a risk what is the risk to us that this could happen to us? What things have we done to reduce the likelihood of this happening to us? What things have we done to reduce the impact of these things happening to us? And what you'll get in response is the technical, we did this bit, and this bit. So we have this tool in the toolbox, we have this tool in the toolbox. That doesn't tell you what impact has that had on the likelihood and or the impact. And that's why I say dog with a bone. You just have to keep asking the question and say, well, fine, you've just said a number of words to me which sound like English, but I don't know what they mean. But it's not my job to understand what those things mean. What I need to understand is, from a business perspective and from a risk perspective, tell me what we have done to reduce the likelihood, or tell me what the impact of the things you've done has done around our likelihood and our impact measures. And tell me what else you think we should be doing to reduce those further so that our residual risk is at a reasonable level. And after a few iterations of that and the IT people realizing that you won't go away until you get the answer in clear terms, you can then start a more informed two-way conversation about, what are we doing? What could we do more of? What do they need? Because a lot of the time this is just an investment piece. They don't have enough people, or they don't, maybe they think they need more technology, which also needs people. But at least it's a two-way conversation. What I find on the IT side is when you have somebody on the second line asking you these things, your first reaction is they're trying to blame us for gaps. Whereas usually the second line are just saying, my job is to understand risk. And even though you speak a foreign language, I still need to understand what the risk is in plain English,
So keep at it until you can understand what you're actually being told and link.
And I suppose again, it's trying to explain to the IT people that you're not there to assign blame. You're there to say, well, have we done enough? You guys are the IT guys, at least from the technical security measures. Do you think we've done enough, or do you think there's more we should do? Because if there's more we should do, then somebody like the risk manager, the CRO, can help the IT team develop the business case, because the risk team can, put a value on the risk, or a cost on the risk, and then say, well, if we spend this amount of money, it reduces the likelihood by this. If we think the cost of this attack is going to be, whatever, then by putting this in and the likelihood of reducing by this, then the perceived benefit is a monetary amount. So that's the kind of business case stuff that's very hard to do when it comes to cyber defenses, because how do you put a value on a defense? Whereas the risk team can do that. Yeah,
absolutely. And of course, it unfortunately gets more valuable after the event rather than before, but prevention.
Yeah, I mean, all it takes is for somebody in the organization to have gone through this once, and I don't mean to the extent of the HSE's pain, but to have gone through one incident of an email account being compromised, or some kind of an information security issue, and then the cost of legal advice, forensic examination, and all that. You see how the costs mount up and how much time is burnt by internal management to manage it all. When you go through that once, you will never want to go through it again.
And on that happy note, Sam, before we wrap up, I want to ask you about something completely different. I know you work sometimes with firms, especially in the RegTech sector, maybe startups or certainly earlier stage rather than later stage. And they often look to deal with regulated firms, or they're looking to have their tech bought by a regulated firm, particularly financial services regulated firm. What kind of experience do those firms have, the tech firms? What are the questions that they hit, and the kind of the pitfalls or the potholes that they tend to bump their wheels in?
I mean, I think for a lot of firms, they have got to a certain point of success in terms of, they're now making an income, and they're trying to get into what tends to be bigger, more sophisticated financial services firms. And let's say they engage with somebody in that firm, and that person has a problem, and this firm sells a solution that really solves this problem. And they think, great, the sale is done. And then they hit the large financial services procurement process, which involves a lot of questions, not just about cyber, but a lot of questions to assess, what risk is this service provider bringing into the firm. So a RegTech or a FinTech or a service provider sees themselves as a solution provider, but the sophisticated client initially sees them as a risk, and that's kind of a disconnect. So it's trying to, I suppose, I help those firms understand why are they perceived as a risk, and what are the things they can do to reduce that perceived risk. So sometimes it's about, as I say, telling the story, not telling a lie, but just explaining what it is they do, why what they do is not a risk, or why they're not going to expose the organization to excessive risk. And sometimes it's about, behind the scenes, getting their house in order. So if it's about cyber, it could be about, getting some kind of certification around the, how they're managing information security risk and cybersecurity risk, aligning to certain frameworks or going to ISO certification or whatever it might be, to prove that they've got this nailed. So to prove that cyber risk is not, or cyber risk is appropriately managed within the firm. But that might be what I'm talking to them about. But in reality, you're nearly kind of translating, or you're helping them understand the culture of what is like, what is life like in a regulated firm, because that culture is very different to the world of a service provider, who might have got this far because they moved fast and broke things and cleaned up the mess after the event. That's not the kind of world you can be in when you start selling to regulated financial services firms.
So these RegTech firms, they think they're going to rock up to the regulated businesses like knights in shining armor to solve a problem, and then Sam comes along and bursts their balloon and says they're actually just viewed as a risk rather than necessarily a solution provider. But
well, hopefully it's someone else that has burst their bubble. Usually somebody on the procurement or the supplier take on or due diligence team within the prospect.
So you're there to pick them up again, Sam.
I'm there to say, yeah, that is a bit of a pain in the ass. That is a bit of a kick in the wrong place. But maybe there are things we can do to show them that you're on a journey. I hate that phrase, but show them that you are where you are now, but you are going to be somewhere else. And if you get to that somewhere else in a certain time frame, would you now be more appealing to them? It's kind of like I described it in the past as, the initial conversation with somebody in the global financial services firm is a bit like, a guy and a girl, or a guy and a guy, or whatever it is, go on a date, they agree, another few dates, then they might agree, oh, let's get married. And then, somebody says, oh yeah, well, I just want you to meet my family and make sure that they approve. And then, the family come along with their cyber risk assessments and their, due diligence and all this kind of thing. And you thought you were nearly at the top of the aisle, but in reality, you're going nowhere until you've got approval from the family. So it can be a bit of a culture shock to a firm that has, as I say, has had success, but hasn't had success in these types of firms and hasn't been exposed to the world of these types of firms. And sometimes in the past, you might have been able to get around that by having a sponsor within the global firm who had the right contacts to kind of get around some of these procurement checks. But cyber risk is a real thing. Information security risk is a real thing. So there's less and less of that. There are fewer and fewer people within financial services firms that are prepared to stake their professional reputation on getting, a service provider in the door without all of these checks and balances in place. So it's just, I suppose, bringing the firm through the therapy to make them understand what is the world of regulated financial services like, and what do they need to do to live in that world.
Well, you've created the image in my head, Sam, of meeting the family and then performing a cybersecurity assessment on me.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's just your family.
Yeah, would you call me the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, or the, I don't know, but yeah, it's
very good.
Interesting.
Well, listen, thank you very much, Sam, for your time. Great insights there, as always, particularly around cyber, obviously it being such a topical issue for obvious reasons, but it's one the regulator has touched on more than once. It's one they expect as a standing agenda item on the agenda for regular board meetings. And it ain't going nowhere. So important for all of us to keep it in our minds.
Indeed. Yeah, great. It was great talking, Danny. Thanks a lot.
Take care. Thank you.
The Aquest Podcast, Funds Industry Conversations.